Hey everyone, I'm so excited today to be sitting down with business futurist Jonathan Brill. Forbes has named him the #1 futurist in the world, and he's been a futurist for organizations like HP, he's been a board advisor for Frost & Sullivan, and a strategic advisor from everyone from Amazon to IBM to Samsung to Pepsi. I want to ask him what organizations need to do to rewire themselves to be more resilient in the face of the coming wave of disruptions, whether it's AI or even disruptions that we can't predict. It should be a great conversation. Let's jump right into it. Jonathan, thanks so much for being here. I wanted to jump right into it. And I'm really interested in getting your perspective and just, what you see as being, the current state of, technology, especially in an enterprise sense in 2025. And I guess maybe I'll preface that by saying one of the things I'm seeing from my perspective and just hearing is that the world we're seeing right now in 2025 in this space is just fundamentally different than we were seeing even in 2023, 2022. And I wanted to get your perspective on that. Do you agree? And what do you see as kind of being the big differences?
Yeah. So I think obviously AI is the big talk of the town. I think that the real enterprise plays are probably another 18 months out. But that's obviously the big thing we can
Yeah.
talk about what's going to happen, why, what the limits are, that cause us to know that. The other issues, are that CIOs, CTOs are being asked to move beyond the technology stack to start thinking about how it uh, impacts things like
Uh,
governance, how it impacts things like go to market. And so technology isn't just about technology anymore. It's about the entire organization, how we structure our firms. The third thing that's, I think, going on, and it hasn't quite happened yet for most firms, but we're starting to see AI enable people who don't know how to code do conversational coding, right? Talk to
right.
an interface that writes code for us. It doesn't really work yet, right? But what we're going to see over the next 12, 18 months is that it does. And so much like the early 2000s when we went from, having people with master's degrees writing HTML, to all of a sudden, Blogger and
Mhm.
now Squarespace and WordPress, that those things that used to require technical support suddenly don't. That doesn't mean technical support goes away or that it's decreasing. It means that the amount of code that runs our organizations is about to go up geometrically. And that's really exciting to me. So we have complexity. With that complexity, we have security issues that are going to go up
Right.
geometrically too. We have the more strategic nature of IT in organizations, and then we have AI really shifting the game and starting to see IT for the first time, maybe in 10 years, 15 years, really start to become central and strategic to the growth trajectory of organizations.
So tell me a little bit more, Jonathan, about that 12 to 18-month time horizon. Because if I
Yeah.
understand the implication of some of the other trends you're seeing, is it that that's how long it's going to take for these organizations to kind of rewire themselves to get to value here that take into account some of these, low code, no code trends or, expanded role of IT? Is that the case? And what is going to separate the winners from the losers here?
Yeah. So historically, it takes about 5 years from something to get from research white paper to, software
Uh,
business, right? So we saw the first round of this 2017. We saw the transformer model in a white paper 2022, 2023. We start seeing that start to build out, right? Lots of people are talking about AI and they've putting stuff in chatbots in their organization. But looking at, Salesforce, right? Looking at SAP, looking at Oracle, they're starting to put out product. It's still early stage, right? And it'll take that about 18 more months. And if you're an enterprise buyer, you never want to buy the first
right.
version of anything. Right. So that's why I'm saying, okay, well, we started building this thing out. There's a strategic priority in putting it in our organizations. These companies are now playing the large players, are now playing catch up. And then, in about 18 months, there will be enough maturity there for us to start putting this in our organizations and in a deep way. you are talking about change,
Mhm.
right? So here's the reality. What's going to happen? And I talk to senior leaders, I talk to operational leaders, I talk to executional leaders, and everybody thinks the other ones are going to be impacted.
Huh. Interesting.
So the answer is probably all of the above. But what we look at when there's a recent meta-analysis by the National Academy of Sciences led by Eric Brynjolfsson, and it said, about 14% of the tasks in professional services will be automated by existing AI tools. I think that's about right. What I'm hearing, when I talk to um, people who are selling this stuff is, hey, we're getting 50 to 70% efficiency bumps for our software developers. And then I talk to my manufacturing clients and they're like, yeah, we're getting 15 or 20%
Mm.
efficiency bumps. Well, that's like,
That's
that's
good. That's
nothing to
not
sneeze
nothing.
at.
Yeah.
That's investable. Um, but we're seeing um changes at the scale that will shift the nature of
Uh,
firms into what I'm starting to call an octopus organization. And when you think about the way that organizations are structured today, we built them, the current architecture in the 1850s and 60s based on the railroad. And there were several problems with railroads. One is you needed to get, some box from this place to that place across a couple of different rail lines, and all of this stuff needed to be synchronized. And the tools that you had to do to do that were a pocket watch and a telegraph that went one
mhm.
direction. Right, so you didn't have telephones.
Right.
You didn't have bidirectional, right? And when you take a look at Thomas Edison, right, his big breakthrough was the bidirectional telegraph. The reason that he invented that was he was involved early on his career working in a telegraph station, and because someone's pocket watch was off by 4 minutes, 2 trains, I believe,
Oh,
collided.
no.
There was a train accident of some sort. And so he said, "Okay, this I see an
Right.
opportunity." And the kind of multiplexing is what was invented as a result of that. So my point being, we had that going on, and we also had, high levels of illiteracy, and like almost no one going to college and no one having good decision making skills. Right. So that's why we built the organization like it is today. You had to have a leader who didn't know what was going on the ground,
Uh,
right? And people on the ground who weren't capable of making good decisions and had no context for what was going on up here. When we think about what's going on today, right? Uh, Large language models are sucking up all of the information in the world. You know, I, all of us have Otter or a transcription tool, hopefully, in our businesses. As a result, we can build models and we can build agents that are looking at all of the new information every day and giving it to exactly the right people across a 50,000 person organization. So that context problem goes away. The second thing, and I think that we're getting where chatbots are going to be useful all wrong, which is we think we're asking these things to answer questions for us.
okay.
And they're pretty good at it. And the new stuff, like, you look at O1 Pro and you look at the new version of Gemini 2.5 that came out like 48 hours ago or something, and they're pretty good, compared to 2 years ago. Um, but what they're all really good at and better than most humans at is empathy, creativity, right? And frameworks.
Mm,
They have every business framework
right.
that has ever been developed. They have access to every code library and every code pattern that's ever been developed, right? Um, and so they're going to be better, not necessarily, I believe, eventually at making decisions than humans, but they're going to already be better at helping us make better decisions, at coaching us. And so we're using these things, I think, for the wrong paradigm right now. They can dramatically improve our executive judgment
Mhm.
instead of us trying to offload our executive judgment. That's massive,
Yeah.
right? Because we have this situation where all of a sudden every person in your organization, every intern in your organization has context of a CEO or better today. and executive judgment of a senior leader today. That radically shifts the nature of an effective and innovative and agile firm, because information, knowledge, decisions, governance doesn't have to come from the top down. It can start to come from the bottom up. And that transformation is profound. And it looks much less like the railroad, and it looks more like the neurology of an octopus, where instead of having one big brain, it actually has 9. It has a big brain that deals with executive function. And then for each tentacle, it has a smaller neural cluster that looks at that tentacle, directs it, gets all that information, and then a neural necklace that communicates with all of those smaller clusters to figure out what's going on, to come up with an idea, to take action faster than the big brain can even comprehend what's going on. And so I think we're moving into this world of what I'm calling the octopus organization. It's a radically different place. And the reason this is important for IT professionals, and for CIOs in particular, is all of a sudden we're being asked not just how to rack and stack servers and how to implement some SAP instance, but why? Why are we doing this? How does this impact our human resources? So on and so forth. And as the leaders of code capability and organizations, we are going to get flattened first, and we are going to build the culture first, and we are going to make the change first. And culture change, independent of what people might say, it takes 5 to 7 years, an entire shift of a leadership team. And so if you are a year or 2 early in that shift, your potential to be a leader goes through the roof. We're moving into a radically different world, like you said, than 2022 or 2023. And it's not just technology. It's that CIOs are being asked about the architecture of firms,
Yeah.
about the processes of firms, and having to lead the culture change of firms. And this isn't what we've been trained to do historically. But it's our opportunity to lead now.
Right. Right. So lots of things I want to, that's super interesting. And there's a lot of places I want to take that. I love the octopus model. And if I'm hearing you correctly, we need to change, if I can call it this, the physiology of the organization,
Yeah.
right? We need to,
Yeah, we need to evolve.
we need to
We need
evolve.
to evolve the
We
physiology.
need to
Yeah.
evolve the physiology. And it sounds like that re-architecting, that CIOs, that what we previously have called the technology organization, we're going to be at the vanguard of that. Is that necessarily true? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It is necessarily true.
Sure.
Because the demands on you are gonna be far greater
Right.
than the number of people you have. So you're gonna have to automate first.
Right. Right. And technology
And
in,
it's not a bad, like I said, it's not a bad thing. Coders are freaked
yeah,
out. Like every professional services, code integration shop I talk to is freaked out. The amount of code we are going to have to produce and
yeah.
qualify is going to go up geometrically. I am not concerned about the future
Mhm.
of coders. I am concerned about the security implications. I'm concerned about the efficiency. I'm concerned about the amount of legacy code we're going to produce, and making sure that we're able to either take it out of our organizations or figure out how to just
Yeah.
not keep it running, because the energy cost is going to be massive.
Right. One of the things you said a couple of times now is this 5 to 7 year time horizon to really see cultural change and see this take off. I'm sure you're very aware. Like one of the buzzwords we're hearing, now more than ever, is accelerated pace of change. Right? Like, oh, things are moving faster than ever. Can large organizations afford 5 to 7 years here? Is there an existential risk that organizations that are wired from day one with an octopus model are gonna come in and, eat their lunch and, or is that an overblown risk?
I think it's highly likely. The question is how quickly you can move.
Mm.
So in 2012, I got a call from the Yellow Pages, and the Yellow Pages wanted to build a search engine that they could put local advertising on because they had,
Sure. It's what they do.
access to they had 10,000 salespeople across the country that could go and sell advertising to your mother's hairdresser. And they thought this was a really great plan. The only problem was this was a really great plan in 1996 or maybe
Right.
2006. But in 2012, it was too late. And so there are two things going on here. One is certainly, in 2002, 2003, the Yellow Pages could have caught up. They could have maybe bought Google,
Mhm.
right? Or at least, and also ran and had the capability. They could have, and done something. Um, they didn't. They continued doing what made the money today. And so that's the bigger risk, is that we look at what our investors are asking of us instead of remembering that what our investors really want is to know that our company will be worth more 5 years from now than today. Right. And so there's this incentive misalignment, often at the C level or the board level, that causes these challenges that, if no one's being paid out 10 years in advance, right, which is what Tim Cook's, I believe, his at Apple, his big payout was after 10 years after
Mhm.
Jobs, right? Well, there's a reason Apple's done what it's done, right?
Yeah.
It's never been concerned about this quarter.
Right.
And that's a rarity. So I think it's a big issue for large firms. I think the second question is, uh, what moats do you have, right? So if you are a law firm, guess what? 3/4 of the Senate or something are lawyers. They'd really love to have law firms when they leave the law, when they leave Congress, right? There are these moats that companies have that will slow the pace of change. Um, there is, within law, the bar, the American Bar Association has said that you can't, uh, the AI can't provide opinions for customers. They said that it's an ethical issue,
Mm.
independent of the fact that I think at this point it might be almost as good as my
Right.
lawyer, at giving me
Yeah.
advice. I also want to ask my lawyer. It's just like Intuitive Surgical. They make the surgical robots for brain surgery. Well, the reality is the robots doing the brain surgery. The surgeon's there
Right.
just for the liability, and in case something goes bad. I'm totally glad to pay for that surgeon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, may not make sense, just like I'm totally glad to pay for my financial advisor for the 3 weeks a decade
Right.
that he provides value,
Right. It's plus
right?
AI. It's not
So
instead of it. It's not. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so it's really where's the value, and what we're gonna see is the question moves from what are the tasks that I do to where is the value that I provide,
Right.
right? So the one of the things I like to think about is in the last election cycle, presidential election cycle, Andrew Yang was going on about how truck drivers were going to go away. And what he forgot was we used to have stagecoach drivers and they did the same thing,
Mhm.
right? It wasn't that they spent 12 hours a day turning a steering wheel instead of a horse. It's that they protected the gear, the people, the material, and back when something went wrong.
Right.
The value has nothing to do with how you spend your time.
Hmm.
And so, what we're going to become really clear about in the next 5 years is where's that value? So, as a coder, right, your value isn't in coding.
Right.
It's in understanding the unspoken challenges that your customer faces, surfacing those and turning those into code. AI will not necessarily understand the unspoken challenges because guess what? There is by definition no data.
Mm. So again, lots to think about there. But as we think about finding that value, as we think about rethinking our business models in terms of how we get ahead versus trying to play catch up, you started to answer the question of what do we as leaders need to be doing differently? What do organizations need to be thinking about? And as you were answering that, I was thinking about the kind of adjacencies with Rogue Waves. Some of the guidance in
Yeah.
the book you wrote on this a few years ago. Um, Is it the same playbook? Is it a similar playbook? And for those who haven't gone through the book, what do you kind of recommend are kind of the big
Like, in
elements here?
uh, unexpected plug. Yeah, so I I think there are a couple of things to be thinking about. The first and most important thing is that for any of this technology change to work, there will have to be deep psychological safety on your team,
Right.
right? Like what we know about transformations is people get freaked out, people don't use the
Yeah.
tools, right? And so you spend the money and you get none of the value. So how do we create a situation where we make sure that people feel safe enough using the tools to create the value? So I was talking to the CTO of a big four um, consulting firm, and he said, "Yeah, I had to just make my people use AI." I said, in your 360 reviews, you're going, or, in your annual review, you're going to tell me how you used AI in
Mm,
your thing, or you will not have a job,
wow.
right? I don't recommend that, but he wasn't able to get people using the
Right.
tools. So there's kind of that stick part, but then there's the carrot part. And we recently worked with the Harrison assessment on a survey of 2.7 million managers to figure out why some are dramatically more effective in times of uncertainty than others. And these are going to sound relatively obvious when I say them, but uh, they were dramatically better at leveraging help from their peers than their peers. They made unexpected connections. They had much broader social networks than their peers, both inside
Mm,
and outside of the organization. So when they needed some informal advice, when they needed a new way of thinking about something, when they needed to shortcut red tape, right, they were able to do it. In a world of optimization, neither of these things sound like things we want to be doing, but they're critical in
right.
the age of AI. The third piece is about controlling chaos, and this is really what Rogue Waves is about. It's about when the world changes, how do you turn that into leverage? And the reality is that we build these standard operating procedures in our organization to manage risk. For one of two reasons. One is the people in the organization don't have the context or the executive judgment. Uh, or two, we're just too lazy to manage it ourselves. And in a world of significant change, when the rule set changes, right, when the playing field changes, standard operating procedures will often kill us,
Right.
right?
It's bureaucracy, right? It's what holds
And
us
yeah,
back.
and yeah, and so how do you get to the situation where you're teaching people to think in from a first principles perspective about their challenges, about their risk, and how to resolve it? Right? AI is going to be critical in helping people do that. Right? It's going to be critical in helping us overcome our decision biases, overcoming our lack of knowledge of the situation, our lack of history, our lack of contextual awareness, our lack of understanding of who else is impacted by our decisions. It's going to be incredibly important. And then the last piece, is about taking the time to know what's missing. Right? We spend so much time, right, like looking at what's right in front of us and solving for that instead of taking back and saying, okay, well, what's causing
Yeah.
this? Right? How do I solve for that? Am I still creating value by doing the thing I'm doing? Because the world's changed. So when you take this time to leverage help, to create those unexpected connections, to control chaos, and to know what's missing, you have this really nifty consultant acronym, LUCK, but you also have a tool to
Mm.
rapidly teach your people how to create more in your organization. Because in a world of probability, if you can shift possibility, you create dramatically more luck for yourself, for your organization, in your business, in your life.
Right. And that list is so interesting to me because everything on it is things that are just they're not replaceable by AI today. And I feel like even the things we talk about AI doing 5 years from now don't come close to that. And so to me, it's so interesting that that's what the study came up with, because it highlights what's indispensable about us, right? And about what we add to the equation.
Yeah, that's what if it's in the database, you don't need to know it,
Hmm.
right? In 5 years, if it's in the database, you don't need to know it. And this is all about dealing with stuff that's not in the database,
Right.
dealing with stuff that's not in the system. And when you look at, I get to teach once in a while at the Army War College, and they have this great model where they talk about executional, operational, and strategic leaders, right? There are 3 levels of
Hmm.
leadership, and the things you need to know are essentially different. And when we were talking earlier about, the new role of the CIO, right? It's historically been a relatively executional or operational role. What I'm suggesting is it's suddenly a strategic role. And that is, in layers below the CIO, right?
Yeah.
There are suddenly strategic roles because we're dealing with architecture, we're dealing with process, right? We're dealing with culture. How do we put those new methods of governance in place to shape the firm, to shape its agility, instead of just taking orders? And so that's a very exciting time, but it requires this stuff that is not, kind of traditional project management, scientific management, PMI type of stuff.
So I'm curious, in your mind, Jonathan, when we traditionally talk about, like, you know, even in the realm of CIO, what's strategic, and we say, oh, they're going to put together a technology strategy for the organization. We've talked about
Yeah,
that cascading down from the high level business strategy. Is that going away? Is it
sure.
just now it is the
The
business
technology
strategy?
strategy is the business strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and certainly in 5 years.
Yeah.
Like the snarky thing people like to say is, every leader is now a technology leader and every company is now a technology company. I don't know if that's true today,
Yeah.
right? But I take a look at, we were talking about law firms in 5 years, right? Like I have a real strong question about, is Westlaw, which, owns the databases and the software side of things, uh, the law firm, and the law firm is simply a sales mechanism for Westlaw,
Mm,
or what's the value add there? Because it's
right.
not the paralegals, it's the relationship.
Right.
And it's that ability to deal with the things that aren't in the database.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to me that you brought up, the snarky one line about, like, every company is a technology company, because as we're talking, like, to me, it's almost become the inverse. It's every technologist is now a business person. That
Absolutely.
Right? Because when you
Absolutely.
talk about those, big four traits, one of the places my mind went, and we talked about it, is like, what's the inverse? What are now the commoditized skills, and are those the technology skills? Like, is what's traditionally the technical skills being commoditized, and what does that mean for what's today or yesterday our, technical organization?
I think that's absolutely true. The thing that, and I think it was a mistake for Jensen Huang at NVIDIA to say that the coding's irrelevant. In the same way it was a mistake for Jeff Hinton, the kind of the creator
Yeah.
of the transformer model and deep learning, or really deep learning, to say that radiologists were irrelevant because machine learning is going to solve this. Um, Over, I think that, your average medical doctor does, I think, a radiologist does over 40 tasks. One of them is looking at at radiology images.
Right.
The reality, I think, of learning to code is it's learning how to make really good lists, really,
Hmm.
really, really precise directions that get you from one place to another. That skill is going to become incredibly valuable moving forward because we're going to have to direct, 1,000 agents, 1,000 chatbots, 1,000 AIs to do something. And that ability to make a really good task list, that's the future.
So when you say task
You
list, I
know,
just want to make sure I understand correctly. This is like sort of like operational parameters or guidelines? Like, what's the objective and what are the things you need to do to get there, or do you see it differently?
Sure. Well, I think it's being clear about the right level of uh, you're digging a little deeper than I've thought about it, and it's a great way to think about it. So in the military, they have a thing called an op board, and it's basically says, "Hey, here's what we understand about the situation.
Hmm.
Here's what we think might not be true. Here's what we think might change.
Right.
Here's the outcome that we want you to deliver
Yeah.
on. Here are the limits that we are giving you that you can fire upon if fired upon or whatever. Here's what to do if things go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And here's what to do if I don't come back, right? Like that list is incredibly
Hmm.
powerful because you give people all of the information to be successful without telling them what to do,
Right. Got it.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's one level of abstraction. But the next level down is okay, well, we want to put the processes in place. We want to be that operational leader, right? That's the
Hmm.
strategic leader. We want to be that operational leader. Okay, how am I going to execute this? Right? And what types of software, what types of AI do I need to execute this? What amount of data center access, what network bandwidth, what whatever do I need to execute this? And then getting down to the next level, right, about the executional leadership. I think that's increasingly going to go away outside of the like the stuff about like how do I get access to the software, how do I get access to the material, how do I get access to the data
Hmm.
center, how do I get access to the energy, how do I get access to the data, how do I get access to the electricity. That's still a human problem,
Really.
and it will be as we understand that those are increasingly valuable things. um but you're gonna still need all of those skills, but I think that ability to say, okay, well, what is this person really asking for,
Right.
and then figuring out how to make a really impossible to go wrong list
Right.
of how parameters, as you were saying, how to deliver on this.
Yeah.
Um, hey, that's still a rare skill, man,
Yeah.
and it's the thing we teach you as developers.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? Like having done a bit of development and worked with developers, I mean, my perspective is that's been the value of developers from the dawn of time, right? Like if I think about
Yeah,
your trucker analogy, if you think that a
yeah,
coder's job is to hands-on keyboard write lines of code, like yeah, you're going to
yeah.
think it's
It is,
completely disrupted. If you think their job is to structure a problem and understand a scenario, right? That's not necessarily going
yeah.
anywhere.
Well, and I think that this problem structuring may start to go away,
Okay.
but the elicitation and the looking at information that's not being given,
Hmm.
I think that
Right.
that will continue. I think about the big game that the AI kiddies are playing right now is, competitive programming. It's really good at competitive programming.
Hmm.
It's like, well, yeah, but there was a really clear objective
Right. Right.
so that we could judge whether you did it or not.
Yeah. What happens when there is no objective or the objective is
What
unknown or
happens when there is no Yeah,
yeah.
what happens when there is no objective?
Yeah.
And so I think there are two things here that we need to kind of keep in mind. One, we've gone from, a year or two ago, ChatGPT 3 or 3.5 was, on the 60th percentile of programmers at competitive programming. And then O1 Pro, I think if you give it $1 million of, of tokens, is at, in the top 0.2%,
Right.
right? We can argue
Wow.
the economics
Yeah.
of that, right? But let's ignore that for a second. What we have seen is that the software has gotten effectively better than most humans at this task. And the question is, did it in fact get dramatically better or just better than humans? It's one of the
Sure.
things I think about a lot is there are cognitive limitations, right? So if I ask you to remember three numbers, 200, 123, 624, right? You can maybe do that. Now 100, 243, 624, 737, 263,000. You probably
Yeah.
lost the first one or two numbers. The reality is we can remember three, maybe four numbers at a time.
Hmm.
That we remember seven digits is actually not true.
Hmm.
There's a whole bunch of psychological testing around that. We remember 3 to 4, and we can block that into chunks of, a
Right.
couple of chunks. And that's how we do it. My point being that there are cognitive mechanics, right? Just neurological mechanics that limit how well we can do. And so as these tools get just, 1% or 2% better than us at some of these cognitive mechanics, they become dramatically better than us at whatever the downstream task is. And so what we're going to see over the next couple of years that's just really exciting to me is that there are these things that seem like, yeah, only humans can do that. And these tools aren't going to get 100 times better on an absolute
Hmm.
scale than us. They're going to get 1% better than on an absolute scale. But on a relative scale, they're going to move from, you know, uh, uh, 60th percentile programmer to, you know,
Yeah.
whatever,
Right.
99.98% percentile programmer just by getting a little better.
Yeah. You mentioned coding specifically for that. Are there other use
Yeah.
cases you've seen or you're starting to see emerge where this is the case, where AI is starting to enter that 99th percentile of
Just
human capability?
I think with prompting, it's getting pretty good at some things, and I think that there are a number of domains that we can judge that on, right? Is it faster? Can it do 40 hours of
Hmm.
work, at the 80th percentile in five
Yeah.
minutes? Well,
Good
that's
enough, right?
economically really, really valuable,
Yeah.
right? Better than my intern in 5 minutes. Economically really valuable, right? So, um, that I think is happening really quickly. So I'm working on a research um, for uh, forging for the forging industry. Right, these guys have giant,
Hmm.
2,000-ton hammers that just
Wow.
bang massive pieces of metal, and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what does AI mean for them? And you know, I could have gone and read, hunted down and read, 5,000 pages of papers. Or I could have AI go and hunt
Right.
down 80% of those and point me to exactly the sentence that matters. And then I can make a judgment,
Yeah.
right? That's super valuable. And is it better than me? It's better than me that in that I would never do that work.
Right.
Like
Of course. Yeah.
economically,
Makes sense.
I could never do that work. And so it makes me dramatically better. Um, I think the other thing we need to think about here is like the AI kitties, and sorry if as a listener you're one of them, but the AI kitties are obsessed with trying to create artificial general intelligence, and I
Mm.
think that's a really bad idea to try and mimic humans. I think we should find the things that humans are terrible at, right? Or humans don't pay attention to, and get better than nothing at those. Right?
Right.
That's the easy way to get superhuman.
Right. The kind of the negative space around humans versus just
Yeah,
competing
then
directly with
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think to me, that's where the real power is. We have all of these cognitive, even within the things we're able to do, we have all of these cognitive biases,
Hmm.
right? Like if it just checks those biases for us,
Yeah.
totally able to do that today.
Right.
Totally able to say, like, hey, research Daniel Dennett, here's my paper, where am I biased? Like
Yeah.
it's able to do that counterfactual thinking because there's a framework.
Right.
Right? Stuff we're terrible at. And by the way, I can do it for you, you can do it for me, but I can't do it for myself,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Because of the it's in my because it's already in my brain.
Yeah.
I am the system.
Right.
So I can't look at it.
Right.
Um so that kind of thing I think is going to be incredibly powerful.
So on that note, I'm thinking again about the interplay between AI and people, and we've talked about this an awful
Yeah.
lot. And there's some conflicting opinions here, and I've heard we've almost talked through implicitly both sides of it. But I've talked to a number of futurists in this space, Jonathan, and one of the prevailing schools of thought is we're going to see the rise of the generalist, and the technical skills are going to go away, and it's rise of the generalist. Now you've got, I think I'm hearing a little bit of a different
Sorry,
perspective.
I just made a face
For anyone who's
for those
only
in our
listening,
radio
yeah.
audience.
So why don't we respond to that before I even add any more color?
So I kind of everybody cooks a little bit, right? And what we discover when you read a recipe is that there is so much information that is tacit and never in a
Yeah.
recipe, right? About like if you're baking, what's the humidity today?
Mhm.
How does that impact my pie? The way my bread rises, right? And so the question here is the generalist will be able to do a lot more, but they will never bake a great pie
Mm,
because they don't have the feeling
right,
of what's going on.
right.
And I think that's incredibly important to understand that having depth, intuitive depth,
Hmm,
in what you do is incredibly important. When you take a look at biology papers, right? What's the replication rate, right? Like, right, 50%, 30% of them can be replicated, right?
hmm,
Either everybody's lying, uh, or there's parts of the recipe that aren't
right.
written down. And it's gonna be some time before the whole recipe gets written down, and so I think that's true for almost everything, and so I don't know that the power of the specialists is going to go away, but it's and it may be that once you become specialist in one thing, then you can move that way of thinking to other
Hmm.
things, but I don't know that just being a dilettante will create outsized value in the future
Mhm.
because everyone can do it.
Right. So it's not necessarily AI is turning everyone into a great baker. It's AI is making the great bakers that much better.
Well, it's making everybody into a good enough
Right.
baker. So I think about PowerPoint,
Mhm.
right? So up until the early 1990s, you had in many cases, some guy who would literally cut up graphics and paste them. He was called a paste up artist
Yeah.
and paste them up. And then you had another guy who would shoot film of that thing. And then you had someone who would run the printer and maybe someone who would run the ink in the printer.
Mm,
And then you had a graphic designer, right?
mm,
And then you had the customer. Today, you're doing your own PowerPoint.
right.
Now, are you as good as all of those craftsmen stacked up? No, you just aren't. You will never be Saul Bass. You will never be one of the great graphic designers in the world, and your graphics will never be in the Museum of Modern Art. I guarantee you this. But is it damn
Yeah.
good? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the question here about the specialist is where is that needed?
Mm,
Right? Graphic designers, right? We were becoming an information economy. We were all pumping out text for a living. And all of a sudden, like good enough graphic design became fine. But, you know, do I want a good enough brain surgeon? Do I want a good enough, car mechanic? Do I want a good enough, truck driver? Probably not. Like good enough truck driver that doesn't run into the bridge embankment 99% of the time ain't good enough.
right.
So I think there's that need for specialization and that need to have a cognitive intuition about the subject is
Right.
is gonna continue to be important.
Well, and I think that's incredibly powerful, and really interesting to me. And the reason I asked is because, you said something earlier about actually implementing this organizational change and the importance of
Yeah.
psychological safety, about bringing employees along with you. And, my sense is there's still an awful lot of angst about, are we being replaced by AI? Do I still have a job? What is my value? Is this, is
Yeah,
AI going to prevent food being on the table for my family? And,
right.
my sense is as leaders, if we're going to move our organizations forward, we need to be able to, address some of these questions and probably be truthful about it. But I mean, do you buy that, or is there a key piece of the conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
I so what you're asking about, foundationally is how fast will this happen?
Right. And
And the kind of standard line is, well, these are generational shifts
mm,
and they happen slower than you expect, and everybody does fine, and the economy grows. And the reality of the 1980s and early 1990s is that this happened slow enough that the 50-year-old plus
right.
all retired out, and it was all right.
Yeah.
So if this shift happens in 10 years, that will not be true.
Mm,
The second thing to think about is that unlike the 1980s and 1990s, we are not in a population boom, we are in a population bust, right? So when we take a look in the next 5 years, I forget what the boomer population dropping out of the workforce is, but it's like 75%, 80%. And so, we're going to see that this generational knowledge, this generational way of working goes away at a much faster pace than it did in the 70s and 80s. So that's happening. There will be a dislocation. These demographics will help us. The next piece is like, what do we do? And that's kind of the question. And part of my answer is, our economy is so overproductive at this point that I have a person who makes my coffee.
mm,
I go to Starbucks and I have a person who makes my coffee. And the 100-year, 1,000-year historical perspective, think about that.
right.
I have a person in Jamaica that grows my beans. I have a person who puts that on a boat. I have a person who roasts that coffee for me. And then then I drive down in my car with 5,000 parts in it, that was made in Germany, to go and get my coffee every morning from my person that makes my coffee. And if I'm really lazy, there's another person who will bring my
Well,
coffee and my croissant to me. I don't do that very often because that's snotty. But my point being, we will come up with new things to do. I'm not concerned about that. In the US, where we are strategically trying to bring technology and manufacturing back to the US for, I think, some pretty good reasons, um, you know, there will be transferability into other industries and other roles, um, moving forward. Like I said in tech, I don't think those roles are going away. I think we're going to figure out that there's value here. I think, like I said, in professional services, we're going to see a 15% or so efficiency bump in the next few years here. That's pretty massive in an industry that doesn't really see efficiency bumps. Um, and that's an outlier, but we're going to see that in a bunch of other industries too. We are going to see dislocation, and we're going to see the job roles shift as one person is able to do you know, you know, whatever, 1.07 jobs.
mhm,
But I think it's gonna take a little longer than people think and a little longer than the CFOs are dreaming.
right. So I want to ask you a slightly different question about that, which is, you're I think very doing something very important, which is you're debunking some of the hype around, oh, this is going to change everything, overnight, or some of the hot air that comes
No,
with AI.
it will repeatedly change everything overnight. It's just that the scale at which large
Right,
organizations can absorb that
right.
is in the scale at which governments will allow that to
Mm,
happen because of the implications for their tax base and the monetary system. There are governors beyond the technology.
right. Right. There's the human pace of absorption and the societal and yeah, I guess the organizational pace of absorption. But is like, can we control that, or is the pace of change at some point just gonna, run us over, and as consumers become more impressed with what this can do, even if it's not quite as good. It just, you
I
know,
mean, it's changed my life. You
yeah.
know? I mean, I was doing econometrics on this in 2018 and 2019, and I saw, and we were in 2016, 2017 building transformer models, or what
Mm,
came to be called transformer models. So, I've been at this for a while, and I knew exactly what was going to happen from, a task efficiency perspective. And by the way, this is not a surprise. It's kind of like tracked exactly
yeah.
what we thought in 2018, 2019. So it's not magical. Like, this was all very knowable.
Mm,
Um, but it still blows my mind every time I'm suddenly able to do, you know,
yeah.
40 hours of work in
Right.
5 minutes. Yeah, it's pretty magical. So I'm not saying that's going away. What I am saying is that, when COVID hit,
Mhm.
I pulled all my money out of the stock market. I said, "Hey, I don't believe White House is gonna be able to deal with this quickly enough. Things are gonna go to heck." And I pulled all my money out of the stock market. And what I didn't understand was that the government and the Fed can just change the rules,
Mm, right.
right? Like, every company in the United States should have gone out of business, and they just changed the rules.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time that's happened. They did it in the 1970s, when we got off, the late 60s, 70s, when we started getting off the gold standard. They did it, in Bretton Woods in the 40s, right? We can literally just change the rules.
Yeah.
And the Trump administration is actively just changing the rules right
Right.
now, right? That's what this is all about. Um, is like, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, JD Vance, people who actually understand technology saying, "Hey, we need to kind of change some of these rules,"
Mm,
right? You might agree with them or not. You might think that this is the right answer or not, but that's what's going on.
right.
And so what we need to understand is that the playing field will shift along with the technology.
Right.
And so this isn't all going to blow up on Tuesday
Yeah.
just because, there's some AGI thing that wins Nobel prizes every 30 minutes.
Right. So I did want to ask you, Jonathan, before I lose sight of it, one of the things you do in your role as a futurist is you separate kind of the signal from the noise, if I can call it that.
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
is some of the noise you're hearing right now? What is some of the hype that you're like, that is BS, that is not going to come to pass, that's on your radar as like we
Yeah.
should be tuning out?
We're starting to see some reality testing happening in the market. So the first thing that was happening was, hey, this is all gonna just explode and it's gonna be great. And that because we're seeing, 1,000 times increase in efficiency gain over, 18 months or whatever it is, that this thing's just gonna run. And the reality is, because we're talking to a mildly technical audience, so, a technical audience, I'll get mildly technical. We were looking at transformer models. Now we're looking at reasoning on top of transformers. Now we're looking at multiple shot on goal, right? Like running the thing 10 times and finding the middle ground, right? Every time you do that, energy use goes through the roof. But what we're still doing is basically, and we've gussied it up, but this is a database search tool,
Mm,
right? And searching a database. The second you get into agentic AI and deep research, right? Now you have an agentic tool that's doing all of this stuff with its database, and pretty quickly going to another agentic tool that's doing the same thing. And maybe those two agents say, hey, there's another database with some other information, and doing that again. You can see how the energy use goes geometric here. And no matter how efficient we get, we're going to see a dramatic increase in energy use. And that's going to be a massive limiter. And the reason it's a massive limiter is that we hadn't planned on this in the US electric grid or anybody else's electric grid. B, the gas turbines that, people like Elon Musk are using, he rented half of them in the country just to run his new data center, and I guess in Nashville, I guess Kentucky, Tennessee. But he took half of the stock just to run one
Wow.
data center. And then you look at those turbines or that class of turbine, and there's a 90-month lead time to buy another one.
Wow.
So we have some real
Yeah.
limits. We have some real limits to how quickly we can increase energy use. And so that's a governor
Mhm.
on what we can do and what's cheap. So you go out to 2035, yeah, this problem starts to be solved. We have small modular nuclear reactors coming online. We have a 10-year backlog of purchases of those things. But up until 2030 or 2032, it's gonna kind of look a lot like what's at the leading edge now in the enterprise space. Right, not what we're doing in the enterprise space, but you take 3 instances of O1 and you get them talking to each other, or you take, Sonnet 3.7 and O1 and Gemini, and you get them talking to each other with different databases. You know, that that's about where we're gonna be for the next 5 years.
Right.
And there will be government stuff, and there will be, hedge fund traders and, like, whatever, that wanna spend, $100,000 a month,
Mhm.
and that'll be different. But for you and I, that's the outer edge.
So, my natural response to that, Jonathan, is, and I've heard people say this before, that as the need for energy grows and it becomes, a more and more valued commodity, sure, you can increase the supply of it, which you're talking about as being, kind of 10-ish years out. But it could potentially also drive a race for efficiency within these models that, can become, not geometrically more efficient, but exponentially more efficient. Is that on the
Yeah,
table?
absolutely. What we're seeing, according to Satya Nadella, uh, and, certainly one of the bubble blowers in this whole thing, but the least smoke blowing of the bubble blowers. Um, he's saying, hey, at WEF, if you multiply out what he says, hey, I think there's about 100,000 times increase in energy efficiency between now and 2030.
Mm,
And, when you just calculate out, in terms of performance improvement, that's about a 10 times increase in performance improvement between now and 2030, or 100,000 times decrease in energy
mm,
efficiency. So in that, you know, is the range of math.
right.
Right. So we'll see things that are stunningly efficient that are ChatGPT 3.5 that will be free,
Sure.
or ChatGPT 4 maybe that will be free. And then we'll see more advanced tools that I would actually use to do work,
Right.
that will be not free.
Right.
And that the cost of those will go up on a geometric curve.
Right.
How long will, ChatGPT's, or, OpenAI has been threatening to put out a $20,000 a month tool? How long will that stay
Yeah.
$20,000 a month? That's a really good question. I think looking at how quickly, everybody's nipping on their heels, 6
Yeah.
months, and then it's 2,000, and then it's, 200 in a year. I mean, that's pretty
Mhm.
incredible.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's
But
exponential, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but the demand for that tool will go through the roof, and so you'll be limited in your ability to access it,
Right.
because the value will, I think, the value of the tools I'm using now are so high,
Sure.
and I'm spending, you know, hundreds of dollars a month, and they'll get easier to use, and every executive will insist on it. I mean, it's just kind of how it's going to work, and every technical person is going to insist on it.
Right. Jonathan, I wanted to say a big thank you for joining us today. I've really appreciated your insight. This has been a great conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. It's wonderful to meet you.